When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. So I read this phrase, and I'm wondering, why were they so afraid? Why was Herod so afraid when the wise men came over and asked him, "Where is the King of the Jews that has just been born?" Why was he so afraid? So we think about it a little, and we know a little bit about Herod, and what we know is he was a very frightened man. Overall, his whole life was filled with fear. And in his reaction to his fear, he did terrible, terrible things. He was always afraid of losing the power that he had. And so anything that came his way, he would get rid of it. Family members, murdered. Political opponents, disappeared. So this was how Herod responded every time he was afraid, because he was so needed to be in power, so needed to be in charge. And so that makes sense, right? So somebody's coming in and saying, "Where's this new king that's been born?" So immediately, King Herod says, "Aha, a threat, let's get rid of it," right? So that makes sense. So he's afraid. That's kind of how Herod rolls. That's kind of how Herod runs. But the other phrase, "and all of Jerusalem with him." What about Jerusalem? Why are they so afraid? Weren't they also waiting for a Messiah? Weren't they waiting for a king? Haven't we read in the Psalms and in the Old Testament of how they're so longing for the right king to come and free them of their oppression and their misery and put them in the rightful place? Aren't they waiting, longing for this king to be born? Why are they so afraid? So the word epiphany there's two definitions that I found: a manifestation of divine or supernatural being, and the other one is a moment of sudden revelation or insight. So you've discovered something suddenly, something's come clear. And so I wonder if maybe the people of Jerusalem, like me, are afraid when something becomes clear. You see, I don't know about your experience, but when I met Paul, and pretty shortly after I met Paul, my husband, I realized that he was it. He was the one. That I would spend my entire life with this man. And let me tell you, I was terrified. What would that do to my life? I had a particular way of being. I had kind of staked myself in certain things, and Paul was not the person that I had imagined that I would fall in love with and have children. He knows this. I've told the story to the family many a times. And so here I was in love with this person that I did not think was going to be the love of my life. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. What would this do to my life? I would have to change. I would have to be sacrificing for another person. My decisions no longer just revolved around me and Paul, and all of a sudden I was kind of care for another baby, for another being. And when I was sitting on a chair at Cathedral in Houston, looking at the altar, about to get ready to be ordained a deacon, I seriously thought, what am I doing here? How did I get here? And what they notice, if I just walked around the edge and just walked out the building, what they notice? Because I knew then that my life was going to be very different. And so maybe the people of Jerusalem, who had been waiting for their Messiah, just like I had wanted to fall in love and be married, just like I had wanted a baby, and just like I had worked so hard and had been affirmed over and over that I would be an ordained person, still, at those moments of discovering and realizing what that would do, they were afraid. Because what happens when the Messiah comes in? Well, how is their life going to be? At least they knew what this life was, and maybe they didn't like it, and maybe they weren't happy with it, but some of them were doing pretty well. And so why would they want to change that? And some of them had used that system to keep that was keeping them from living fully as an excuse and a pretense for why they weren't doing other things. And so now they hear the word that the Messiah has been born. What is that going to expect of them? What is going to change in their life? How will their life be when the new Messiah, when the Messiah comes in and transforms the world? That could be pretty terrifying. That can be terrifying. That was terrifying for them, and that can be pretty scary for us. Because it requires us, if we say we are going to follow this Jesus, it requires some change in our lives. Things will never be the same. And so that kind of change and transformation can make us fearful of, are we capable? Are we willing? Will we be good enough? Will we be able to follow through? But here's the thing. If we call on Jesus, if we call on the people around us in the community of faith to help us through this, then that fear can turn into this overwhelming joy. That fear that we may have about changing and giving things up or taking things on, that fear that we may have of saying goodbye to things and people, can open us with the help of Jesus, with the help of our community of faith, can help us on our journey as we journey on together for this transformative life. And so I hope that during this season, as we think about Epiphany and these moments when we may see God present among us, when we may see God's love and presence and asking us and showing us a different way, when we see that, when that becomes clear to us, that even if we're afraid, we are human, you know, even if that scares us, that we know that with Jesus, and as St. Paul says, with Jesus can give us the boldness and the confidence to do what it is that we need to do, to give up what we need to give up, to take on what we need to take on, because it is in these epiphanies that we are able to see clearly of where we are called, what we are called to be and to do, so that we can then follow this Jesus who showed us how and amazing things to transform ourselves. Because, you know, Herod, we know what Herod did, right? His fear led him to call on his army to kill every child under 2 years old in Bethlehem. But the disciples, and the people around Jesus, who Jesus ministered to, they were willing to take that challenge and act differently and be differently and serve one another. And it is through their experience and through their stories that we are here today gathered. We have this testimony of this community of people who witnessed Jesus' love and transformation, that we now are able to serve and follow Christ. And so in Epiphany, let's pay attention, close attention to God's presence in our midst, even in the difficult times. Just walking alongside, inviting us, opening up this new world for us. And that together we may then follow along, carry on the call of Jesus, and find overwhelming joy. Amen.